What happens when a comedy from 50 years ago still makes you laugh and wince at the same time? The 1970s weren't just funny, they were fearless. Directors used humor like a scalpel, cutting into politics, family, and ambition with an edge that hasn't dulled. These weren't distractions, they were challenges disguised as punchlines. So buckle up, because these 13 satire comedies didn't just mock their time, they still sting in ours. Where's Poppa? 1970. Picture a small Manhattan apartment where the walls seem to close in tighter than a courtroom cross-examination. George Segal plays Gordon, a frazzled lawyer whose life revolves around one task, caring for his overbearing, sharp-tongued mother, played by Ruth Gordon. The setup sounds simple, but Carl Reiner twists it into a darkly funny reflection of family obligation, personal guilt, and the social pressures that keep people trapped in roles they can't escape. The film barrels forward with a nervous energy, stacking absurdity on top of absurdity. Gordon is torn between his desire to live his own life and the crushing responsibility he feels toward his mother. Every attempt at escape, whether through blind dates, frantic outbursts, or courtroom antics, only drives him deeper into the spiral. Reiner directs with a fearless eye, never letting the humor soften the discomfort. He wants you to laugh, but he also wants you to squirm. Audiences at the time didn't know whether to howl or to cover their faces. Some critics called it outrageous, while others praised its bravery in skewering the unspoken rules of family devotion. By pushing the mother-son dynamic to absurd extremes, the movie cracked open questions about how much society expects people to sacrifice for appearances. Today, Where's Poppa still feels startlingly fresh. In an era where caregiving, burnout, and generational clashes dominate headlines, Reiner's film lands like a blast of cold water. It proves satire doesn't just age well, it ages into prophecy. A New Leaf, 1971. What if a spoiled millionaire lost all his money and decided the only solution was to marry into wealth? That's the mischievous premise of Elaine May's A New Leaf, where Walter Matthau plays Henry Graham, a bankrupt man so desperate to maintain his lifestyle that he sets his sights on a wealthy heiress. What follows is a comedy that lampoons greed, class entitlement, and the absurd lengths people go to preserve status. Elaine May, pulling double duty as writer, director, and co-star, infuses the story with both biting humor and surprising warmth. As Henrietta, the awkward heiress Henry pursues, she gives the character a depth that complicates the satire. She's clumsy, eccentric, and often underestimated, yet her kindness constantly throws Henry off balance. The brilliance of A New Leaf lies in its tonal balance. One moment, you're laughing at Henry's ridiculous attempts to navigate high society without a penny to his name. The next, you're startled by how clearly the film exposes the moral rot behind his actions. May uses subtle visual gags, spilled drinks, botched proposals, crumbling mansions to mirror Henry's unraveling grip on control. When it premiered, critics hailed May's direction as groundbreaking, though the studio notoriously cut her original vision down. Even so, the released version still stands as a masterclass in dark satire. Audiences loved Mathau's deadpan delivery, but were equally struck by May's unique voice in a male-dominated industry. Half a century later, A New Leaf still cuts deep. Its message is clear. Greed may disguise itself in fine suits and polite dinners, but underneath, it's just desperation in a borrowed tie. Bananas, 1971. Few comedies have taken aim at politics with the manic energy of Bananas. Woody Allen's film begins with a neurotic New Yorker who stumbles into a Latin American revolution, but the story quickly transforms into a wild send-up of government, media, and America's appetite for quick fixes abroad. From the opening fake sports broadcast covering an assassination attempt, you know the film has no interest in subtlety. Instead, it barrels through with cartoonish chaos, mocking everything from revolutionary leaders to the sensationalism of U.S. news coverage. Soldiers march with comic timing, courtroom scenes devolve into slapstick, and at every turn the film exposes how easily serious matters are reduced to entertainment. Allen plays Fielding Mellish, an everyman so hapless he becomes a pawn in both political upheaval and media frenzy. His character works as a mirror for audiences, showing how absurd it is when individuals get swept up in forces far larger than themselves. The humor may be broad, but the satire bites hard. Released during an era of constant political headlines, Bananas tapped into the public cynicism about both government and media. Some critics dismissed it as too silly, but others saw genius in its relentless mockery. Audiences packed theaters, proving that sometimes laughter was the sharpest response to political chaos. Bananas may be remembered for its zaniness, but beneath the gags lies a timeless warning. When politics becomes a circus, everyone is part of the show. Taking Off, 1971. Before Milos Forman became famous for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, he crafted Taking Off, a satire that's as gentle as it is devastating. The film follows a middle-class couple searching for their runaway teenage daughter, only to find themselves drawn into the counterculture they never understood. At first, the story seems straightforward, parents hunting for their child. But Forman flips the focus. The daughter fades into the background, while the parents attend group meetings, encounter free-spirited youths, and slowly unravel their own illusions about stability and authority. Scenes of parents awkwardly learning to smoke or sing folk songs highlight the generational divide with both humor and melancholy. Forman directs with a documentary-like eye, blending staged comedy with moments that feel almost improvised. The satire doesn't ridicule the parents outright. Instead, it exposes the quiet absurdity of a society clinging to traditions that no longer fit the world around it. Every encounter peels back another layer of suburban pretense, showing that the parents may be more lost than the child they're chasing. When released, Taking Off didn't make much money, but critics recognized its brilliance. It captured a cultural shift with honesty and wit, showing the cracks in the American dream without turning bitter. Over time, it's gained a reputation as one of Forman's hidden gems. Today, its message still resonates. Parents and children may clash over different issues now, but the satire about communication breakdown and generational change hits just as sharply. Taking Off proves that sometimes the funniest mirror is the one held up to ourselves. Harold and Maude, 1971. A teenager obsessed with staging fake funerals meets a 79-year-old woman who teaches him how to live. That's not the setup for a typical romance. It's the foundation of Hal Ashby's cult classic Harold and Maude, a satire that tackles conformity, ageism, and society's obsession with appearances through a love story unlike any other. Bud Cort plays Harold, a morbidly curious young man from a wealthy family who stages mock deaths to shock his detached mother. Ruth Gordon's Maude, by contrast, is a whirlwind of energy, joy, and rebellion against social norms. Together, they form a partnership that flips expectations upside down. Where Harold sees only gloom, Maude shows freedom. Where society sees a scandal, the film sees liberation. Ashby uses visual contrasts to sharpen the satire. Scenes of stiff cocktail parties, polite dinners, and sterile psychiatrist visits are interrupted by Maude's chaotic antics, like stealing cars for joyrides or planting trees in city medians. The message is simple but cutting. Society's rules suffocate, and real life blooms only when you refuse to play along. When it first premiered, Harold and Maude baffled audiences. The box office was lukewarm, and critics were split, some calling it too morbid, others dismissing it as unbelievable. But younger viewers embraced it. Midnight screenings turned it into a countercultural rallying cry, and over the years it became a cult hit. Today, its satire of empty traditions feels timeless. In a culture still hung up on image and reputation, Harold and Maude whispers the same truth it shouted 50 years ago: life is too short to live by someone else's script. The Candidate, 1972. Before campaign ads flooded, every screen and political branding became a billion-dollar business. Michael Ritchie's The Candidate pulled back the curtain with a grin. Robert Redford stars as Bill McKay, a lawyer coaxed into running for U.S. Senate under the promise that he has no chance of winning. Free from expectations, he agrees only to find himself trapped in the machinery of modern politics. The brilliance of the candidate lies in its slow shift from idealism to cynicism. At first, McKay speaks freely, mocking the system and rejecting scripted slogans. But as the campaign gains momentum, consultants polish his image, pollsters dictate his words, and soon he's repeating the very clichés he once mocked. Redford's charm makes the transformation both believable and painful. Ritchie shoots campaign rallies and backstage strategy meetings with a documentary-like style, making the satire sting like reality. The film exposes politics not as a noble pursuit, but as a performance art perfected for television. By the end, McKay wins the election, yet stares blankly at his campaign manager and asks, "What do we do now?" It's one of the most chilling punchlines in political cinema. Audiences in the early 70s recognized the satire instantly. Coming off the turbulence of the 60s and on the brink of Watergate, viewers saw in McKay a reflection of a system that devours authenticity. Critics hailed it as a daring glimpse into politics as theater. Half a century later, the candidate feels almost too real. In an age of staged debates and viral soundbites, its satire doesn't just hold up, it feels like prophecy. The Long Goodbye, 1973. At first glance, Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye looks like a detective story. Raymond Chandler's Philip Marlowe, played by Elliot Gould, wanders Los Angeles with his trademark trench coat and dry wit. But Altman isn't interested in solving mysteries. He's interested in dismantling the myths of heroism, loyalty, and morality that detective stories, and by extension, American culture, once held sacred. Altman reimagines Marlowe not as a sharp, confident investigator, but as a mumbling, disheveled loner out of sync with the times. He stumbles through sun-soaked landscapes, asking questions no one wants answered, and clings to outdated ideals while everyone else has moved on. The satire is subtle but devastating. The private eye, once a symbol of order and justice, is now just another relic lost in the chaos of the 1970s. The film's plot, a friend accused of wrongdoing, a wealthy family hiding secrets, a search for truth, unfolds less like a mystery and more like a commentary on how society discards honesty in favor of convenience. Altman laces the story with ironic contrasts. Violent outbursts treated casually, sunlit beach houses concealing corruption, and Marlowe's stubborn integrity mocked by a world that doesn't care. Critics were divided at first. Some felt Altman had disrespected Chandler's source material, but others saw the genius in turning noir into a satire of cultural decay. Over time, the film gained recognition as one of the boldest reinterpretations of the genre. The Long Goodbye doesn't just poke fun at detective tropes, it questions whether ideals like truth and loyalty have any place left in modern society. California Split, 1974. Few directors captured the messiness of the 1970s like Robert Altman, and California Split might be his most overlooked satire. The film follows two gamblers, Bill and Charlie, played by George Segal and Elliot Gould, as they chase wins in dingy casinos, backroom poker games, and smoke-filled bars. On the surface, it's a buddy comedy. Underneath, it's a razor-sharp critique of addiction, capitalism, and the endless hunger for more. Altman's trademark overlapping dialogue and roving camera turn the gambling scenes into chaotic symphonies. Conversations collide, slot machines ding endlessly, and the frenzy of the casino floor feels both exhilarating and suffocating. Bill is the cautious one, Charlie the reckless risk-taker. But together, they represent the endless cycle of thrill and despair that defines gambling. The satire works because it's not glamorous. Unlike slick casino dramas, California Split shows the grit. Cheap motels, broken friendships, and winnings that slip away faster than they arrive. The film exposes gambling not as a glamorous pastime, but as a stand-in for America's obsession with chasing dreams, no matter how hollow. When it was released, critics praised its raw honesty, though mainstream audiences didn't flock to theaters. Over time, it gained cult status among film lovers who recognized Altman's genius at blending comedy with critique. Today, California Split feels even more relevant. Whether it's casinos, lotteries, or online apps, the same hunger to beat the odds keeps people hooked. Altman's film reminds us that the house doesn't just win at laughs while you play. Charity ever could. In today's world, where spectacle still rules screens, the big bus feels like a cheeky reminder. Sometimes the biggest disaster is how seriously we take our own entertainments. 13 films, 13 reminders that satire is never just about laughs. The 1970s turned comedy into a scalpel, carving open the myths of politics, family, ambition, and spectacle. And here's the wild part. Those jokes still sting today. So, which of these razor-edge comedies hit you hardest? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this list with a friend who loves sharp humor, and don't forget to subscribe. Satire never sleeps, and neither should the conversation.